Hello and welcome to the FatBOSS guide to the Iron Maidens encounter on Mythic difficulty in the Blackrock Foundry.
And this fight, once again, is very similar to the Heroic mode. They have added quite a lot of new mechanics, but really, most of them can be cheese. For the majority of your raid, you won't really see the difference on Mythic, to be honest. Most of it's pretty much the same, just do Heroic, but good. But there are some things that you do need to know because you can completely cheese it and make the fight pretty goddamn easy.
Now, before we go into the abilities and what you need to do to counter them, for this encounter you do want to bring 2 tanks, you want to bring 4 healers. If you can bring both a Disc Priest, well, you kind of need to bring a Disc Priest, to be honest. And if you could bring a Shaman, that will help you out a lot. The Shaman not as important as a Disc Priest. And as for DPS, you can bring more or less whatever you like. So things to know from the very start of this encounter is that Sorka's Blade Dash has been changed. It works mechanically the same. It will still target a ranged or healer within 45 yards. It will dash to them, deal damage, and to anyone else within 6 yards of that player. However, what it will do now is that when it dashes between the tank, the person it's targeted, and the boss herself, it will spawn a tornado that will pivot between those locations for the rest of the encounter until it eventually despawns. If you're caught by these tornadoes, you take damage and you're stunned. On top of this, when you are hit, you'll also get a debuff that increases the amount of damage you take from Blade Dash by 180%, and this debuff lasts for 4 minutes.
Now, people who do get this debuff will always be favoured for Blade Dash again. So the idea is that if you do have this debuff, you're supposed to kind of move away from her, like 45 yards, so you don't get targeted by it again. However, this is where you can kind of make it so the tornadoes are in a nice little corner, and we'll go through that now. So on the pool, you want to have your entire raid more than 45 yards away from Sorka, apart from 1 tank and 1 Warlock. Have the Warlock run a 30% DR passive, so you can constantly take these Blade Dashes and you won't get hurt as much as other classes. And after the first dash is applied to the Warlock, stack all the mobs back up again. For all other Blade Dashes throughout the encounter, get your Disc Priest to apply the biggest shield possible on the Warlock using Clarity of Will and Power Word Shield beforehand. This negates pretty much all the damage from it, and it pretty much makes the debuff irrelevant. All it allows you to do is make sure you always place the tornadoes in the same place, which, luckily for us, is right in the corner of the room, away from everybody else.
Now, if the Blade Dash debuff does drop from the Warlock, which we'll get to in a moment, you need to make sure that your entire raid moves more than 45 yards away again from that boss. You drag that boss over to the corner again, and then you just you essentially reset the fight. You just make sure that the Blade Dash only goes on the Warlock again. And like I said, do know that the Blade Dash will also hit the tank that has aggro, which means he will also get the debuff and he will also take the increased damage from it, but it shouldn't really affect anything, and you don't really need to rotate any cooldowns or anything like that.
So just to summarise that, 1 Warlock, 1 tank over in the corner at the beginning of the fight, spawn the tornadoes right in the corner, everyone else can then move over and do the fight absolutely as normal. Every time a Blade Dash is about to come in, drag Sorka out a little bit more so the tornadoes won't fuck over melee, and then just bring her back in. And you do that throughout the entire fight, making sure that you just shield up that Warlock, and that negates the whole Blade Dash mechanic, and it's absolutely wonderful.
Now, Marek's Blood Ritual also has changed slightly. Mechanically, again, it works the same. It will target any player within 45 yards and deal damage to them, and it will also do high physical damage to the nearest target, so melee, be careful, tanks, make sure you're closest. And when those players are hit, they'll get a debuff that increases the amount of damage they take from Blood Ritual by 180%, but this debuff only lasts for 45 seconds rather than 4 minutes. And just like the Blade Dash, people with this debuff will always be prioritized for when Blood Ritual comes in again. So the idea is you're supposed to outrange it.
However, once again, you can do the exact same thing with the use of a Disc Priest. You can just make it so it constantly just goes on the first person that it went on. So say, like, at the very beginning of the fight, it randomly went on one of your hunters or anyone else. You just make it so they always just stand out of the group, making sure it's facing away from everyone. And then every time the Blood Ritual's about to come in, you shield them. And you're fine. You're absolutely fine. You can do this with absolutely anyone. Even if it's on melee, you can do the exact same thing as long as your Disc Priest is on point. Pretty much this whole fight with these 2 mechanics is your disc good? Because if your disc is good, they will completely carry you. Now, there's one more interaction between the Blood Ritual debuff as well as the Blade Dash debuff, is that they will actually overwrite each other. So this means if your Warlock who's getting hit by the Blade Dash all the time dealing with the tornadoes, if they get Blood Ritual on them, they'll get the Blood Ritual debuff and the Blade Dash debuff will be removed. This is quite a big problem because then you'd pretty much need to reset the fight, making everyone move 45 yards away from Sorka except for the tank and the Warlock, and this is a huge amount of DPS downtime. It's a huge pain in the ass, so really it should never happen. However, Every time you come down from the ship, the Blade Dash debuff will still be up, but the Blood Ritual will have dropped off during the ship phase, so this can happen. If it does go on your Warlock, as we said, you can reset it. Also, Shamans can use Grounding Totem, which will make it so the debuff doesn't even hit the target, so that's like you can use that as a safety measure to stop the Warlock from getting the debuff. Or, as we said, if it happens, drag everyone away, you're going to have to reset it and then go back and hopefully it doesn't fuck up again. But generally, it shouldn't happen, but if it does, just be prepared to deal with it.
And really, these are the only two things you really need to worry about on Mythic. If you can get that bit down, the rest of the fight is very, very similar to Heroic. Now, on the pull, you want to make sure that you do nuke and cleave off Marek, because you want her to be on the first ship. So after around 60 seconds from the pull, Marek will go up, and you'll have to deal with her. Now, for the people not on the ship, you will need to dodge bombs like you just did on Heroic. These bombs on Mythic will more or less likely one-hit you, unless you have a lot of health from extra item level, and you will have to deal with Rapid Fire. If you are targeted by Rapid Fire, make sure that you do kite it away from people, and it's a good idea for your entire raid, really, during this bomb phase, just to be spread. This minimizes the amount of chances that someone's going to die from a random rapid fire. Now, on the actual ship, you'll have to kill Ukrog, and he will still put the blood underneath your feet. Just make sure you keep moving out of them. Just maximize the amount your room have. Make sure they're nice and tight. And this ship is just a real DPS check more than anything else. If you don't actually manage to kill him in time, we'd actually recommend that you try not to bring a healer up. So instead, you only go with 1 tank and 5 DPS. Because this means it'll obviously die a lot quicker, but it can be a big strain on your tank. If you're not a monk and you're not a Death Knight, you'll probably really struggle with this, but it's definitely an option to take if you are struggling with damage.
Now, if it isn't viable for you to actually bring a monk or a Death Knight up onto the ship, so you do need to go with 1 healer up there, you may actually want to save cooldowns from the pull. The most important thing is that that ship dies, so there's no point popping everything on the pull and then you can't deal the damage up on the ship. Well, tough luck, you're going to have to save your Stampede, you're going to have to save all your big cooldowns just so you get that motherfucker down, because otherwise you are screwed.
Once you've killed the guy, you should go click on the bombs on the ship immediately so you can be thrown back down onto the main platform. Don't worry about the bombs on the main platform. You can go and stand in one, as long as you have a Holy Paladin, use Aura Mastery, and you have, say, a rally from the Warriors. This will allow you just to stand in one of the bombs, take the damage from it, and then you can continue the fight from normal. That's the safest way of dealing with it. Now, after the first ship, you want to start nuking off Garan, as you want to go on her ship next. Now, before this next ship comes, you will actually have to start dealing with the 30 energy abilities. So the penetrating shot, it does work the exact same way. You can still feign it, guise it, use immunities and bops and all this sort of shit. At this point, don't use your bops. You really need to save them for the last phase, and there's no point putting them on cooldowns. So make sure you do continue to stack inside them. It doesn't do a lot of damage, providing most of the raids inside it. Now, the Convolutive Shadows ability, this has actually changed. It will still do damage in the exact same fashion, except every time damage is dealt, a pool will spawn out of that player, and if you stand inside this pool, you'll gain more Convolutive Shadow stacks as well as the pool doing damage to you. So if a lot of people stand in pools, everyone's going to have stacks. The stacks are going to do damage to them and spawn more pools.
Yeah.
Which means eventually, if it's like gone horrifically wrong, you can have the entire encounter area covered in pools. So the idea is that you just dispel this debuff before it does any damage, and then that way no pools will spawn. But of course, when you do instantly dispel it and that target has 5 stacks, it's very likely that it's going to one-hit them. So to counter this one-hit, it's incredibly important that everyone in the entire raid is tracking the ability and is ready to react as soon as it comes in. So the way that the ability works is that Sorka will target a player, she will do a 2-second cast, and then the debuff will be applied. And then 2 seconds later, that is when the damage will first come in. So that gives you a little under 4 seconds to actually react to it, ultimately. So within that 4-second time, if it is on you, you need to make sure that you use some sort of personal cooldown. Your Disc Priest needs to react to that and also shield the target. You need to have 1 designated healer just to dispel it, and it should be absolutely fine. I mean, if providing that person at least has a shield or at least has a damage reduction, I mean, you can even use deterrence, you can use immunities. As long as they're back up for the last percentages of the bosses, the last 20%, it'll be absolutely fine. But that's the way you have to deal with that ability. And the last 30 energy ability you'll have to deal with is obviously the Bloodsoaked Heartseekers. These work the same way. However, when you do finally take the damage from the axes, you will actually spawn an orb underneath you. Now, this orb just does pulsating AoE damage to the entire raid, and it is totally unavoidable. However, the further away you are from them, the less damage you take. And providing that you've actually put these right on the edges of the room and the raid is sort of in the middle of the room, you don't even notice the damage.
Yeah.
It's like completely irrelevant. So get the debuff, get the fuck out of the raid. Orbs don't even matter.
So after you've dealt with these 38 energy abilities for around 1 minute and 45 seconds or so, and making sure Garen is the lowest, you will have the second ship. Now off the ship you have to deal with the bombs again and the convolutive shadows, nothing else. You don't have the penetrating shots or anything like that, or the rapid fire, so it's a little bit easier this time. Just make sure you are dispelling people, you'll be absolutely fine. Now this ship's damage on Mythic is absolutely brutal. The frontal cone hits far harder than before, and it is incredibly important that you have everyone spread, because otherwise if 2 people take damage from this, your healer is going to really struggle to keep up. Just like on Heroic though, you do not need a tank up there, so you want to send up 5 DPS with strong damage and a healer. The best healer to send up there in our experience is almost definitely Shaman. Their mastery is so super strong at this, as well as all of their CDs, it does make it very, very easy just to top people up when they're very low. You can try other healers, but yeah, for your first kill, you probably want to run with a Shaman if you do have one, because it is a hell of a lot easier. Apart from that, there's nothing different. Just make sure you do rotate the interrupts on the earthen barrier, and if you do have any spare interrupts, try and get the lightning bolts as well, so that it will move in, as well as reducing the amount of damage you take. It's all good. Make sure you're nice and close to the mob without being stacked on top of each other. It should die relatively quickly, and then you can jump back down.
Now, after coming down from this ship, you'll now have around 1.5 minutes until the next ship. It's at this point, really, that you need to make a decision. Do you want to do the third ship, or push the bosses instead and totally ignore the last ship? Now, in our personal experience, we've never done a third ship, and even on our first kill, we didn't really bother doing it. So we're not really going to cover it in this guide. If you do decide to go for a third ship, we will link a video in the description. You can click on that and it will show you how the third ship is done. It's very similar to Heroic. The ads just do more damage, so you need to like chain CC on them. That's pretty much it. But yeah, we'll link it anyway. But what we would recommend you do is that you just try and avoid this last ship and instead push Marek below 20% health, because you'll be killing her off first.
Now before you do push, try and lower the healths of all the other bosses to as close as 20% as possible. If it means you're going to transition with a boss on 25% or even 30% health, it's not a huge deal, especially if it's one of the like less annoying bosses like Garen. You can pretty much have her on any health because you can deal with her later, but generally just try and get them as low as possible. If you can all have them sub 25% when you push Marek, you are going in with a very, very strong transition. However, if the bosses are above 30 or even 35% health, that probably means you don't have the damage. You should probably look into either wait until next week because you've got more gear, or you can just, of course, go for a third ship and just deal with it that way.
Now, once you've made this transition, all of them, of course, will go to 100% energy and they will gain their final abilities. And it's at this point you want to Bloodlust and nuke the living shit out of Marek. Now, the reason why you want to kill her first is because her Sanguine Strikes will start to absolutely annihilate the raid. As soon as the transition is made, you need to make sure that all of your cooldowns are available as a tank, and you want to start chaining them immediately. As soon as yours run out, you need your other tank to taunt, and for him to start chaining his cooldowns. If both of you run out of cooldowns, and the Iron Will stacks that the boss have now got go too high, you'll easily see your entire raid literally die in one melee hit.
Now, of course, while this is going on and you're supposed to be nuking Marek, the turrets from Garen will be spawning, and you cannot get behind on these turrets. Even though, like, in your head, you're like, kill Marek, kill Marek. The turrets are way more important for all ranged DPS. Everyone switch to these turrets, blow them up as soon as possible, and then go back to Marek. If Marek is on about like 5 mil health or something and a new turret spawns, fair enough, finish off Marek, that's absolutely fine, then get on the turrets. Number one priority, do not let these turrets get out of hand, because otherwise you'll end up just doing no damage and no healing because everyone has to move all the time, and people will fuck up and they will die very quickly.
Now, Sorka's 100% energy ability, Dark Hunt, isn't actually all that bad in Mythic. Just make sure that when someone does get it, make sure they're on full health before the debuff runs out, otherwise they will probably die. You can also throw a Disc Shield on them again, making it even better. But yeah, you shouldn't really need to worry about this. And of course, on top of this, you will still have to deal with all the other abilities. For the penetrating shots, you want to make sure that you start using immunities on it. And of course, you need to make sure that you start using your bops now. You simply just cannot soak this in this last phase. It's far too dangerous and it's not going to be worth it. If you don't have any immunities or any bops or guys or anything like that available on a certain target, let that target just die.
Yeah.
Everyone get out of the way of the beam and just let that target die. It's the best way of doing it. The convoluted shadows will still be coming in. You need to make sure that you still shield and use the damage reduction and dispel that target. You cannot let pulls come out. The rapid fires, again, cut them away from the raid. The blood-soaked heart seekers, you'll only ever really see it once in this last 20%. Again, just try and make the orbs so they spawn on the outsides of the room. The blood ritual, make sure you're faced away from the raid. Discs, make sure you're shielding this target. And tanks, make sure you're the closest target. And the blade dash, this is where things usually go wrong. because the Warlock can be taking damage from bits and pieces here and there, especially like with turrets, or you might accidentally take damage from a Cyclone or anything like that. Discs is so important that you keep the shields up on the Warlock in this last phase, because if he dies, your whole raid is going to die very quickly. And ultimately, if he does die and you can't res him, then people need to start spreading out, so people start dying off one by one rather than everyone dying from the Blade Dash immediately.
Now, of course, try to avoid cleaving at all costs at this point, unless it isn't a single target damage reduction or anything. If you can still do the same amount of single target damage by cleaving, then of course you can, but generally, nuke the shit out of Marek, and once Marek dies, things do settle down a little bit. Generally, at this point, you do want to switch to Sorka, even though you might want to think, oh, we'll get rid of turrets nice and quick, they're the most annoying. Sorka's probably doing the most damage to your group, because everything that Garan does is entirely avoidable. You can avoid the turrets, you can avoid the rapid fire, you can most likely cheese the penetrating shot, and she doesn't even melee hit the tank. Like, so if your tanks are really low, or they're just about to die, on our first kill, we had no tank and Garan left, and we could still kill it because Garan doesn't actually need to be tanked. So if you can just kill off Sorka as soon as possible, because her tornadoes are annoying, she's putting debuffs on people, she's bloody dashing all over the place, she's a pain in the ass, finish her off as soon as possible, while of course making sure you constantly kill those turrets, because of course too many turrets means it's going to be a fucking mess.
So if you can get to this point and you manage to kill Sorka with the majority of your raid alive, with iron will stacks not being so high that people are dying from like the iron thing, whatever melee hit is called, from Garan, you've pretty much got the kill.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to fuck up from this point, especially if there's not many turrets up. You'll be absolutely fine. So she's just useless, she just stands there. Kill her off, and there you go, that's the fight.
Yeah, it's mainly, this fight is pretty much just getting, of course, sorting out the debuffs. That's probably the biggest learning curve, and it might be a little bit boring for the majority of your raid, because really it's only a couple of people trying to learn a fairly complicated mechanic from the very beginning, so you do need to be a bit patient. But once you got that down, as long as you can get a clean 20% transition with all the bosses fairly low, it's pretty much a kill. As
and
long
if
as
you have a
don't
disc
fuck
priest
up.
that can carry your entire raid team.
Yeah, discs are ridiculous. Bring discs. Disc priests are broken again. Thanks, Blizz. But thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope this guide did help you out. If it did, then make sure you do give us a like. It helps us out a lot. As well as if you want to see any of our other Mythic Blackrock Foundry guides, then make sure you do click up on the annotations you see on your screen now, and it'll take you straight to those videos.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.